it's funny because get this, the more people that I meet and the more of these, the more I see the more I get to see there's certain places and actually get to expand my bubble. The more I see how I look back at some worlds I used to be a part of, and I realize that I've come across people who are so stuck in wanting people to be just like them. In other words, it's like I love diversity. I'm all for diversity of thought, feeling, expression, opinion, motive. Of talent. There are those people that like and preference too, diversity of preference.
Yeah.
I've come in college. I've come across people. Sadly, I went to high school with these same people where when they found out that I didn't drink, they for years have tried to get me to drink with them, and I kept
have a drink.
Yeah, and I kept on literally just saying to them, "Nah, I'm good." I wasn't even a Christian yet, by the way.
Yeah.
It was something that my parents kind of conditioned me to think about. But then again, it got to a point. I think when I was 16, I was able to think for myself. I thought for myself for a moment. I thought to myself, "Do I want to do that? No. I mean, I know your parents don't want you to do that, but do you want to do that, Jason? Do you? Do me? Do I want to do that? No, I don't. It's not that I can't. Listen, I can go. I was legal at 21. If I wanted to, I could go to a bar right now. I can, but I just don't want to do that because it's just I don't care for it. I don't care for it. That's it. Mm-hmm. But it's when you explain that to people, they go like what? Jason, you mean to tell me that you never drank in your life? Politics, whatever, name it, culture, whatever. We can have the same interests and talk about the same things day in and day out, but then when it comes to alcohol, that's a one social activity that for some reason, despite all of our similarities, that is like the line that divides us. It's like, oh, you don't drink? Forget everything that I have in common with you. You're not cool. You go over there. Like yours or like.
Hi, it's James with Cowboy 43 Productions here, and I'm here with my friend Jason, who is a social worker, to summarize it. And we are doing a video for a blog post that I have been making on my thoughts on racism. I think racism is a huge topic in America and in the world, and racism has been kind of a plague of humanity throughout history. You have different cultures that are debating with each other, having arguments with each other over the topic of racism. So I basically say as my first point, racism is a measure of culture. You have one culture, and then you have another culture, and the two cultures are struggling to get along with each other because of their differences or their perceived differences. What do you think about that?
Yeah, just based on what you were saying.
Yeah.
Culture. Yeah, no, that's true. And I feel like there's a lot of layers that go into that as well. That tend to only that tend to scratch the surface very, very violently. Especially when people are not willing to actually do the work in trying to solve the problem. Actually, repeat that back after what you just said.
I said racism is a measure of culture.
Mm-hmm.
You have one culture and you have another culture, and they're just struggling to get along based on their perceived differences. Mm-hmm. They may not actually be that different. They may just be humans trying to take care of their families and live in their land that they're living in. Or different things like that. But sometimes greed gets in the way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's like some people have arguments over religion. The different religious practices. Even in the same country, you may have the same religion, and they're all fighting over their faith.
Yeah, different religious sects too.
Religious sects, they fight.
Denominations too, Protestants to Lutherans, Catholics, Christian. They call them sects of Christianity, mm-hmm. But they all have their own differences. There are different ways of practices, religious practices. There are different ways that appeal to themselves or appeal to their beliefs. So yeah.
Yeah, so we got that, just that culture. One of my friends, her family's from one of the countries in Asia. I can never remember off the top of my head, but her family has different arguments with people from other Asian countries because of past disputes. Like this country, Laos or something, took land from this country, and so they see somebody from Laos or whatever, and they identify that person, and they go, evil, danger, and then they say something mean.
Yeah. That happens abroad. That happens abroad too.
Europe. I know someone who's a missionary in Greece, and Greece is predominantly, mixed color. Like they have a little bit darker skin.
Yeah.
But they're technically, almost white. Many of them. But they have it where one of the ladies, she had a woman she rescued a woman from a trafficking situation, and the woman was black, very dark African, and she was trying to find this woman a job in a coffee shop, and the owner of the coffee shop had said, well, how dark is she? The owner was a little bit worried because the patrons wouldn't like somebody who was real dark skinned. So it's that tension where you're trying to find a job. Some countries in Europe, I believe I was hearing about this, they've gotten rid of the name on the applications. So they've said when you apply for a job, you can only see the applicant's job history and their qualifications. You can't see their name until you want to interview them. They hide that as like a legal law or some sort of company policy, just because people, if they hear that your name is something from like India or Middle East or something, they might discriminate.
The biases go up.
The bias goes up.
The preconceived biases go so far up.
I knew somebody who said they couldn't find a job because they were Latino and their name was very Latino. So people just wouldn't even call them back because of their name.
Yeah, if I can actually piggyback off that real quick, I remember one time too. It's not as severe as that because I was a lot younger when this happened. I was like around 14 years old, but I remember 9th grade. I was placed in a scholastic support class. And I never understood why I was placed in that class. I didn't have the guts to go and talk to my administrators and my school counselors about it, because I kind of stuffed it down. I kind of just ignored it. But when I realized what the class was about, I started to realize, wait a second, this is not the class I signed up for. What I signed up for was tech. I signed up for a tech learning to technology, computer printing class, PowerPoint class. But apparently they went in and without my consent, took tech off and put this support reading class in place. And I believe that the class is maybe designed for students who practically maybe struggle or are a little behind, or they show some kind of rating or score on their literacy, on their literature level. Whether it's they didn't do as well as on an exam, like a reading exam on a state level. But the funny thing though, the really interesting thing was that the Gates reading exam is the exam that we take in 8th grade to basically determine your literacy level or determine your educational reading level. So they know where you stand when you get to high school. They know where you stand reading wise. Well, I scored an 88 on the Gates reading exam. It was not hard at all. I knew my stuff. And when the counselor told me, she was just like, yeah, you scored an 88 on this test. I'm not sure why you're in this class, because your reading abilities are actually improving. They're amazing. They're great. And then I realized that later on, looking at my last name, Chianchuku, being Nigerian, that's a name that no one's really heard of at all. It's completely uncommon. It's like a foreigner walking into some kind of into a strange land. I guarantee that there was a lot of bias and a lot of prejudiced thoughts that probably came up in the office when they saw my name, but they saw my score. But they must have seen my score. But from seeing my name, it must have given them this idea where it's like, okay, this name does not seem familiar. And I am going to probably assume that their reading level is not that high. Therefore, we need to put him in a class where he can improve his reading level, which was completely unnecessary. They didn't even consult me about that. That actually was something that even my dad was upset about. And I even contemplated going to talk to them about switching me back into the class, but for some reason I ended up not doing it. I just ended up not talking to them. I could have, but I didn't, because I didn't really know how to utilize or how to confront people to do that. I would be confronting a higher educational source. I would be confronting the people who are in charge of this, telling them, listen, there's a mistake. Why am I in this class? Because I don't think I should be in this class. And who knows what kind of conversation would have came out of that. But, no, I see what you mean. Not just to piggyback off what you were saying about the woman who was about how the job hiring rules changed in Greece. But we keep going.
Yeah. So I was saying, you've just got these cultures that are conflicting with each other. It's like, my family is Italian, and part of my family, I'm German, Italian, English, just different parts of Europe. But so back in the early 1900s era, some of my great aunts and uncles, they worked at Kodak, and
booming business.
Yeah, it was a booming business. I think Kodak had a lot of things, but they had the thing called the Italian problem, where people, not the company itself, but some of the management, they were racist against Italian people, in that time. So they called it the Italian problem, and they would just, so a couple of my relatives, they hid the fact that they were Italian. A couple of the women, they married men who were Irish or something, just to kind of get away from that. But one of my relatives got blown in because they were Italian. They said, and so the management pulled them into the office and said, we won't fire you because you're Italian. We can't do that. But we're going to stop you from getting a promotion. We're going to stop you from going anywhere in the company because of your Italian heritage.
That is so dumb.
It's very dumb. I basically say, racism is measured with culture, but it's also ignorant.
Very ignorant.
Because you're doing that to somebody, you're giving them that.
You literally know nothing about the person's background. Mm-hmm. All you know is their ethnicity.
They might be the best worker you've ever had,
right?
But you're worried about their ethnicity.
Right, and that's actually a similar experience that I've had myself. Most people knew I was Nigerian because and they didn't know I was Nigerian until I told them. Mm-hmm. But that's all they ever knew about me. And on top of that, there was just a lot of caricatures that were assigned to me that were not true. So people would take certain negative pop culture elements and kind of like assign it to me, but no one's actually getting to know who I am. You just know me from my ethnicity. You don't know my story. You don't know my history. You don't know my family's history, and because of that, you're ignorant. And of course, I didn't even know what ignorant was. Of course, I was so young back in the day. But looking back, those experiences do shock that. They do shock that. So yeah. Ignorance is definitely a big key, and ignorance is funny because ignorance is what not only divides, but it's destructive as well. Because people will think that they know so much about something when they really don't, or someone when they really don't, and in reality they are really just painting. Because we form our own realities, our own perspectives. Our perspective is our reality. So when we create a perspective or a perspective of somebody, or a story of someone that isn't true, but we convince ourselves that it is. Literally, and you also try to convince others that it's true when in reality it's not. It leads to a lot of division. It can lead to a lot of ugliness on that person's part, though, because if you're the one spreading all this jargon that's not true about someone, that's gonna fall back on you. But at the same time, the person that you're talking about, who you don't know anything about at all you know for is that whether they're Italian, Irish, Nigerian, French, whatever, they will suffer for that. They will suffer because of your ignorance, but that will also fall back on you as well because you are ignorant enough not to learn about that person, who they really are. We'll keep going.
Racism is ignorant. I remember I had a coworker of mine who was Middle Eastern, and so we were driving a lot. We were working together for the night, and we were driving along, and we had this really, we had some pretty good conversations. We shared common interests. We found common ground with each other. So that was cool. But my coworker, they told me that they were Muslim and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," and they ended up telling me, Jesus is referenced in the Quran, but it says in each book that he's not the son of God, he's just a prophet. He comes from Jesus, he comes from God's soul, he is going to come back at the end of the days and judge the world. They believe that. So they believe every little thing probably in the Christian Bible. They just don't believe that Jesus is God himself, or Jesus is the Son of God. He's more just like the eternal high prophet. Like he's the highest of all the high prophets.
Right.
So it's just like a demotion from Son of God, and Son of Man. And but anyways, so my coworker told me they had been reading the Bible, and that's just something that was difficult for them as a Muslim to say, that they were reading that, and that there was just that contradiction. Because the Bible will say the Father and the Son are one. Whoever sees the Father but does not see the Son, they're missing something in all this. Just because Jesus has appeared himself to them. But anyway, so we were able to, we didn't argue at all. We didn't have any negative feelings towards each other. We just had a conversation and we just shared our, beliefs. And that can be something where, some people probably wouldn't share their beliefs very much. They'd probably argue and yell and get all up in each other's face. And I think for us, we just kept it very simple.
Right.
Just saying, this is what we believe in. I'll ask you a question. You'll ask me a question.
Right.
So we had a fun, night. And
that's amazing, man.
And I even have friends of mine who, are black. I have friends who are Latino. I have friends who are just different, races.
Backgrounds.
And we get along pretty well in today's world.
Right.
Right. Even though sometimes it doesn't happen with everybody.
Of course, yeah. I think it also goes back. It also goes, and the fact that you're able to do all of that also goes back to your approach as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you approaching these people?
Yeah.
Are you approaching them with an open mind, wanting to learn more about them, or do you want to approach them with what you know, and you think that they ought to know what you know? And when a lot of people don't understand is that in this culture today, meaning a culture where people just like to talk so much or talk at people rather than talk with them. If you don't meet people where they're at, where they currently are, that also means acknowledging their story and their walk of life to where it brought them. If you're simply walking up to them, trying to infuse to them your knowledge or trying to convert them, so to speak, that's not gonna get you anywhere. It's not gonna get them anywhere, and people will not want to be around you at all, because what you're trying to do is it's almost like you will basically almost be viewed as someone who wants to indoctrinate people to inherit your beliefs when you're not even being sensitive of where they came from.
It's like in the Bible, the Bible goes off, and from Abraham, you've got one line that becomes all the Jewish nations, Judaism.
Right.
So it's that people, and then you've got another line that goes off and becomes all the Arab nations. So you've got two different nations formed out of Abraham.
Right, the fathers of Ishmael and the fathers of Isaac.
Exactly. And then you've got Christianity, which comes from Judaism. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Jesus meant to create Christianity necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think he was more like, I'm going to reform the Jewish faith.
Right.
And then the Jewish faith didn't want to be reformed in the way that he was trying to speak to them.
Because his entire ministry was focused on Israel. He
Yeah.
spoke to the Jewish people. He was exhorting them. He was exhorting them, go out and take my message. Go out and make disciples of all nations. He's basically recruiting them in a sense, trying to recruit them to literally go and carry out his mission. It was to Israel first. It was to the Jews first.
And then to the Gentiles.
Right. And the problem though is that Gentile believers today, when you don't learn about the Jewish roots of our faith, roots of Christianity, in other words, before it was Christianity, it was Judaism, and those roots are and Jesus being the Jewish Messiah, those are his roots. Mm-hmm. Those are his roots. When you don't acknowledge that, basically it's like you make Christianity your own religion in a sense, and then you somehow think that the Jewish people the Jews who have rejected their Messiah, which many scenarios went into that. First of all, you automatically, and then because of history, as we've seen with what Martin Luther did, with what Martin Luther and after he was excommunicated, and his 95 thesis, when he tried saving the Jewish people, bringing salvation to them through Jesus, and they rejected him. he advocated killing them. He clearly missed the mark, and that mistake led to, and basically he did what Hitler he wrote what Hitler did centuries later.
So Martin Luther was in charge of, he was anti-Semitic?
He was anti-Semitic.
Oh wow.
At first he wasn't though, because after he was just trying to bring the gospel to the Jewish people. I don't know what his approach was, but we got to think about that too. What kind of approach did he have when bringing the gospel trying to bring the gospel to the Jews? And when they weren't digging it, then he said, "Wow, these people are devils." In other words, they killed their Messiah too. So they should be killed as well. Bad idea. And look what kind of history started. Look what that kind of history did to the church.
Yeah, and you got all this, it was unintentional, because Jesus never preaches anti-Semitism, and I don't even know, but there's just different points where...
it wouldn't make sense if he did, because he's also a Jew himself.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of my third thought, is that racism has an agenda. So people typically